What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I want to talk about Pantoja versus Van, and there's three aspects of that fight I want to cover. The first of which is whether or not it was a legitimate win for Van. The second is kind of how the injury happened and how it can be avoided. And the third is what this might all mean for Pantoja going forward. So going in order, it was a legitimate win for Van in one sense, and in another equally meaningful sense, it was not a legitimate win. So it's legitimate in the sense that it is official. That all happened by the rules. That is what is supposed to happen in that situation. That is supposed to be declared a TKO victory due to injury for Van. The title is supposed to transfer to him. He is supposed to be the new champion under those conditions. That's all well and good. That's all official. He will go down in the record books as a flyweight champion in the UFC. That's what's supposed to happen. It's not supposed to be a no contest. It's not supposed to be a disqualification. Nothing like that. If your opponent gets injured and it's not due to a foul or it's not due to equipment malfunction or something like that, or something with the cage or something, it's not as if Pantoja was getting pushed against the fence and the fence collapsed and he fell through it and hurt himself. That would be a different scenario. He got injured falling, and getting pushed over. And that's legitimate. You're allowed to do that. That's part of fighting. And if you get hurt while that happens and you can't continue, the other guy wins. That's just how it works. And so that's all well and good. And yeah, it is a win. And, I'm not even mad at Van for celebrating because this is a big moment for him. This is a big turning point in his life. He's got all these new opportunities now. Could he have been a little more humble and a little bit more self-aware as far as I won't truly feel like the champ until I beat him in a rematch or until I defend the belt or whatever. Sure. But, ultimately, that's not of much concern to me. What is kind of more important, and this is where the win is not legitimate, is that it's not legitimate in terms of his resume and his legacy. And by that, I mean, no one is going to look at that win as meaningful when they rank Van as an all-time great flyweight or when they rank him amongst the other champions. And it could end up just leading to him being seen as a paper champion who may as well have never had the belt in the first place. So let's imagine there's a rematch. There's an immediate rematch. Van doesn't defend the belt against anyone in the interim. They have an immediate rematch and Pantoja smashes him. If that happens, no one is going to think of Van as a real flyweight champion. Even though he technically was, no one will actually give him that credit. It would be like if Peter Yan killed Sterling in the rematch, after getting disqualified in the first fight. If that happened, just no one would think of Sterling as a real champion. And fortunately for Sterling, he eked out a split decision win, which I do think was fair. But, if that had happened, we would all be forgetting that Sterling was ever champion. And it's comparable to when Randy Couture lost his belt to Vitor Belfort because 30 seconds into the fight or something, he got cut in his eye. Vitor grazed him with a punch and the seam of the glove nicked the eyelid of Couture and it split it open bad and the doctors called it and it was ruled a TKO due to cut because it was a legal punch. And if the glove cuts you, that's not an equipment malfunction in the way that falling through the cages or something like that. That's all well and good and it was seen as legitimate. So Vitor was the champion. And then they had a rematch, and Couture smashed him. So most of us, know that Vitor won the belt that time, but don't think much of it. And, so that's where it's on Van now to, at a minimum, defend the belt against someone else, and ideally just actually beat Pantoja in a rematch. Now, as far as winning by injury, there is a scale of that. So this is kind of the worst way to do it, where the fight just gets started. You've done nothing of damage. Actually, Pantoja had landed more up to that point, even though not much had happened. But Pantoja was actually ahead on strikes, and then you push him over and he hurts his arm. That's kind of the worst way. A better way would be how Tyron Woodley beat Carlos Condit. Now, I think that happened in the second or third round. Woodley was winning the fight. He had been kicking his legs, and he had been tackling him. And some combination of those things, I can't remember exactly what was the straw that broke the camel's back, but at some point, because I think it's been a while since I've seen that fight, but I believe he initially hurt it on a double leg when he took him down, because you can see Condit react to getting taken down. But then the final moment is when he like leg kicks Condit, and Condit like hops on the other leg and it like gives out. And then he collapses and the fight's over. Now, in a case like that, where it's like, A, Woodley was kind of winning the fight anyways, B, the fight had gone on for some, at least half of the bout, and C, Woodley's offense, the leg kicks and the takedowns, clearly played a huge role in that injury occurring. And sure, like Van pushing over Pantoja, is what hurt him, but it was more just the way Pantoja fell and not like, it's not like he slammed him and injured him or something like that, So, again, of all the ways to win by injury, this is kind of the worst case scenario. This is the scenario where you will be given the least amount of credit for the win. And other people have compared it to this, and of course, because it came to my mind immediately when it happened, it's comparable to when Shogun Rua, when he was in Pride, when he fought Mark Coleman, and like 30 seconds in, Coleman double legs him. Shogun reaches the exact same way to post, and the exact same thing happens. His elbow snaps in half. And then, it's a TKO win for Coleman. They have a rematch years later in the UFC, and Shogun wins. So, like, this is not unprecedented. We'll see what happens going forward. A big difference is that in that scenario, Coleman was the old man and Shogun the young man. So when they fought later, it was easy to predict that Shogun was just going to win. In this case, it's reversed. Pantoja's the old man. There's the question of how he'll come back from the injury, et cetera, et cetera. But in any case, until this is settled more definitively, or until Van starts defending the belt against other people, this is just not going to be considered legitimate by anybody. It's official and it's legitimate in that sense. And it's all well and good for Van. In his next fight, regardless of whom it's against, he should be getting his... Well, I was going to say he should be getting pay-per-view points, but pay-per-views aren't a thing anymore, so I actually don't know how they're going to be paying champions going forward into the Paramount era. But, under ordinary circumstances, that would be a benefit for him, and that's all well and good, and that's what he deserves because he is the official reigning defending champion. But, again, like, no one is going to see this as legitimate until he starts winning again against other contenders or against Pantoja. So, how did this happen, and how can it be avoided? Now, if you know anything about judo or like Japanese jiu-jitsu, things like that, you learn how to break fall. You learn how to fall while you're being thrown. And one thing you're always taught is to never reach. You're taught to instead slap. So what you do is, you curl in, you tuck your chin to keep your head from whiplashing, and you land ideally on your side, and you slap the ground near you to help dissipate the energy. You do not reach and try to post. Now, the reason you're taught that is for exactly this outcome being avoided, because this can happen in a few ways. Like if you reach with your hand, the main risk is what we saw, that the elbow will snap, because if you think about it, your arm is stiff. It just takes a little bit of that force to not be in perfect alignment and snap. You also don't want to land on your elbow, because not only can that like hurt your elbow, but like in that case, now it's one joint up, you're mostly worried about the shoulder getting jarred from that impact. And if I recall correctly, that is what happened to Johnny Walker that one time when he did the worm, or he started doing the worm and he like fell forward and he did like a hard front fall where he like landed on his elbow. And if I remember right, he did that and it like jarred his shoulder really bad, like a moron. But that's another thing you want to avoid. And that's why they tell you to break fall. And that's why that's so harped on in judo. Like my dad, who got me into jiu-jitsu, lifelong martial artist, he always said the greatest self-defense he ever learned was learning how to fall, because he's gone his whole adult life and he's only been in a couple scuffles here and there. But, especially if you're like us, we live in Minnesota, it's fucking snowing out right now. Every winter you slip on the ice. Like learning how to fall is very valuable. It can save your life. And the way you fall is break falling, with the slap. However, I actually advocate reaching, and you just need to do it right. So, because especially if you're like me, like I'm over 200 pounds, like I hit the ground harder than a small flyweight does. And certain falls, yeah, you can just slap, it's fine. You can just do a normal break fall. But anything where I'm like really lifted off the ground and I've got like a big space to fall, whether it's a back fall or a side fall, I'm typically reaching, because I want to dissipate some of that energy. Because even if I land correctly, even if I slap and tuck my chin, it's just so concussive to the body, and it's so hard to avoid some amount of like brain rattling from a fall like that, even on a good pad. I mean, if it's a crash pad, it's fine, but on any sparring mat, regardless of how padded it is, like that's a lot of impact for a big guy. And so I believe in reaching, and you can reach to the side and you can reach backwards if it's like a back fall, but you need to do it right. And the way you do it right is not by having a stiff, straight arm, because again, that's what's going to snap the elbow and potentially even jar the shoulder, and you don't want to land on your elbow, again, for the same reason you don't want to jar the shoulder. But what you do is you land with like a bend in your arm. So if you've ever like learned how to do a forward roll, you go forward like this with a curve in your hand, and you're basically rolling along your arm. You're not like impacting the ground, you're rolling along the arm. You're turning your body into a ball. And you can sort of do the same thing in reverse, where like you are falling on your side, you reach, kind of like almost landing with the edge of the hand, and you just kind of let it roll down. It's just a way to dissipate energy. And same thing going backwards. You can reach behind you like this. And again, you're not like trying to jolt, block your, halt your momentum with your arm. You're just trying to glide down like that. And you've got to have a bend initially. You've got to kind of land with the edge of your hand. You've got to kind of know that you're trying to roll with it. But if you do that correctly, I think that's very legitimate. Like I do that if I'm getting thrown for real, like, or if someone's doing like a blast double Murotagari kind of thing, where I'm going straight back and they're like lifting my legs high into the air and my back is like 5 feet off the ground and I'm going to fall directly onto my back. I'm not just tucking and slapping. That's just too much force. I'm fucking reaching, but I'm going to reach and kind of allow myself to roll down my arms. I'm not just going to stiff arm and take it all on my shoulders. So that's my 2 cents on that. As a lighter guy like Pantoja, it cuts both ways. On the one hand, there's less need for him to reach because it'll be less concussive if he slaps. But secondly, since he's lighter, the odds of him injuring himself by reaching are smaller. Because even that other example I gave of Shogun Rua, fucking guy's a light heavyweight. Him catching himself, it's more weight to catch. And him catching himself with like a heavyweight Mark Coleman coming along for the ride, that's more weight to catch. For Pantoja, just catching himself, less risk. And that's kind of where the final topic, like what does this mean for Pantoja going forward? Part of what's worrying about this is he is getting old. He's 34, I think. He's going on 35. I'd have to double check. But like, this is a bad sign because one of the things that comes with aging is being more injury prone. And that was kind of what occurred to me as I saw this. Like, yes, this is sort of a freak accident. Yes, this is a thing they warn you against because this can happen. So like, in some ways, this might have just been an unavoidable outcome. But I feel like if Pantoja from 5 years ago did the exact same thing, there's a chance he just wouldn't have gotten hurt. There's a chance that his joints and ligaments and everything were a bit more resilient back then, and they're a bit less so now. That he doesn't recover as well from all the training, and his tendons are in a more constant state of being on the verge of fucking snapping, and that this did it. So like, it's a bad look in terms of that. And that's where, again, I said, when Shogun rematched Coleman, he was the younger guy. In this case, Pantoja will be the older guy. And if this is a sign that he's starting to age, a sign that his body can't take the wear and tear as well as it could in the past, that's not good. If that's not true, if he's still holding up fine and this was just a freak accident, then fine, he can take his time and recover and come back and hopefully be as good as he was against Moreno. But it's worrying. It's worrying for me in a rematch because it's like, yeah, this is what starts happening. Like the wheels start falling off the car and you're just never the same anymore. So it's worrying on that level. And I'm going to do another video later in the week kind of talking about Pantoja and Merab and sort of whether or not they're aging out of their primes. But that's what I got in this. I think the win for Van, yes, it's official, but it's not legitimate in the way that we actually care about, which is what it means for his legacy and his resume and so on, what it means for him as a champion relative to other champions. In that way, it's not legitimate. How did this happen? It's not that he can't reach, I would argue. It's that he can't reach with a stiff arm. That's the real thing. And with Pantoja, it's worrying that this happened, not just because it could happen to anyone, but because you're worried it's happening to him specifically because he's old and his body can't take it anymore. So we'll see what happens. We'll see when he can come back. We'll see how he looks when he comes back. But this is a thing that would have me worried. Like, I was picking Pantoja going into the first fight, and this is a thing that would... I'm not saying I'd definitely pick Van in a rematch, but like, this is a thing that would have me much more worried about picking Pantoja. Because now, to me, that is... It's not proof that he's aging out. It's not proof that he's past his prime. It's not proof his body can't handle it anymore. But it's a piece of evidence suggesting that those things might be true. So that's what I've got on that.